All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar, Technology Solutions for Trade Surveillance. We hope you enjoyed today's presentations. Our speakers are Tim Baker, the Managing Director of Financial Services Practice Lead at Expero, and Scott Heath, our Customer Success Executive. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom meeting. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to leave them in that box and we'll be happy to get them answered for you. Just again, we are recording today's session, so I'll be sending out a follow-up email later this week with a copy of the recording. And also, if you have any questions or issues during the webinar, please feel free to message me. I'm the host, Laura Smith. I'll be happy to help you out as best I can. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to our panelists for the webinar.
Great, thanks, Laura. Great to be here. Scott, good to see you. So we've got about half an hour here. I want to kick off with really a high-level view of what's going on in financial crime. So by way of backdrop, there's a lot going on. You know, as we've come out of the pandemic, we now see some economies struggling, a wide variety of stresses on communities and industries. We've got conflicts in the Ukraine and now Sudan. And these have exacerbated a lot of the problems we had post-COVID. We've got high inflation, you know, across most of the rich and poor nations. And the knock-on effect really is that financial crime, for example, those linked to human trafficking, are at an all-time high. Next slide, Scott. So with the expansion in the variety and the creativity of financial crimes and those that can, you know, orchestrate them, comes a wider target base. So I kind of see this in three buckets. So you've got consumer scams. You know, these have been on the rise really for the last 10 years as criminals exploit vulnerable individuals like my mother, you know, being phoned up out of the blue, credit card scams, you know, identity theft. We've got companies being targeted through phishing and email scams, being extorted. We don't hear about a lot of those in the news because they're, you know, these people are paid off, you know, without any publicity. And even governments have, you know, have shown some vulnerability. And this is not just kind of tax fraud, but you know, things like the, you know, the Paycheck Protection Program, about 10% or $80 billion of fraud occurred. And that was just one of the US COVID programs. In the UK, I think the number was lower, it's about $2 or $3 billion. But they only got about 10 million pounds back from that whole debacle. Next slide. So the ever-increasing complexity of the financial industry brings more opportunity to these financial crime organizations. So criminals are getting better at hiding their tracks, using sophisticated communication networks, using crypto. Over $8 billion of money laundering was done through crypto, according to chain analysis, and that was 30% higher than in 2020. There's new payment mechanisms and business models. So I'm hearing a lot more about embedded finance, you know, which is really finance applications being embedded, you know, in other applications on your cell phone. And this makes it much easier to confuse customers and to get them to do things that they don't want to do. And meanwhile, in financial markets, they've become ever more complex. And post-COVID, or even as COVID happened, volumes went through the roof. Financial instruments, you know, continue to be invented and continue to be more complex. And so, you know, so with all of that going on, and that fairly troubling picture, what we want to do now is really kind of double click on, you know, what we do here at Expero. And we have a number of practices, you know, focused on helping our customers fight financial crime, but we want to focus on this particular area of trade surveillance. And I was a principal at UBS for many years and saw up close, even in the, you know, in the 2000s, you know, the amount of effort that goes into this and the complexity of monitoring that takes place. And it's just got a lot more complicated. So what is trade surveillance? It covers a wide range of potential activities, but trade surveillance is really intended to detect and investigate illegal trading activities in securities markets. And as you can see, there are many different flavors, which in a way compounds the challenges for banks and brokers. And while the focus here might seem to be more on the surveillance of the activities of trading counterparts and customers, a good proportion of what the banks have to do is keep an eye on their internal staff, like their traders and their bankers. Supervisors or principals, as I was at a bank, are legally required and actually have personal risk when things go wrong. So the stakes are really high. And many of the schemes listed here are very technical and by definition hard to detect. But they generally come down to a couple of areas. One is around manipulating markets by trading in a certain way, including at certain times of the day, certain securities, or taking advantage of information that's not public. For example, information that a bank might have about a pending deal or a large block trade or other non-public information like, a pending, upgrade or downgrade in a piece of research that the bank's publishing. Next slide. So if a firm's systems fail, then the reputational and financial costs can be significant, both on the institutions, but also the individuals, as I say, who are supervising those activities. There's a list here, and this is by me really is a a subset of the full list, but I want to kind of highlight a couple. One is the LIBOR scandal. Apologies, I think the lawn guys have just arrived. The LIBOR scandal saw multiple banks fined across multiple jurisdictions. In this case, because LIBOR was a multi-currency and multi-region issue. And it's not just market manipulation that banks have to worry about. If you recall back in COVID times, people were working from home and a lot of bankers and traders were using their personal phones and unmonitored texts, and that netted about $1.8 billion in fines for the banks. So a really wide variety of activities being taken on by the regulator. Next slide. And what is become clear is the regulators are becoming much more sophisticated, as they should be, in the detection of these activities. So for example, the SEC's Market Abuse Unit, which was set up I think around 2010, has now been staffed with teams and with capabilities that are really quite remarkable. And I think when you look at this list of, I think this was their initial team, I think most hedge funds will be happy to have a team with the kind of skills in this team. And then in 2020, the consolidated audit trail was completed, and this allows the SEC to peer into any firm's specific trading activities. Next slide. And this is my last slide. So there's been a race by financial institutions to keep up with this changing landscape. And I've listed just a few of the challenges that we continually see as consultants in this space. Obviously, COVID, now thankfully behind us, has stressed many of the existing systems. As I mentioned, financial instruments have become more complex. And generally, banks, are having to cope with a spaghetti of legacy trading systems, which combined with the issues above, often generate poor quality outputs and false positives. So there's the backdrop. It's pretty tough, both broadly in financial crimes, but very complex in this trade surveillance space. So I'm going to hand over to Scott now to get into the details of how we're helping our clients solve for this set of issues.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Well, I think the goal here is that Tim laid out some pretty scary things, right? And a lot of us as practitioners that are out there doing that, we're kind of overwhelmed. And so one of the things we want to talk about today is how do we do this? So what's going on behind the scenes? And then also part of that is we're going to show what Expero offers a product that's flexible to allow practitioners, whether you're on the technology group, et cetera. And so we hear this rise of machine learning and Python notebooks are going to save the day, but there's a lot to that, right? And as Tim mentioned, people that are on the front side, they may not know all that. They know that it helps, but how do they actually sort of do their job and catch the bad guys, or quite frankly, syndicates or groups of bad guys? So what we start to see then is those same use cases that Tim mentioned over on the left. But what about all this cool stuff over on the right? I've got an entire department that's designed for analytics. They're looking for these patterns, but they're in raw formats. Well, that's really what happens here in the middle. Is that's what Expero Connected is bringing to the table, is the ability to harness the items on the right. So we have some algorithmic math, machine learning, other kinds of elements, but connecting it to a process and or a piece of usable software that's in human terms. And as one of our customers said, I have a lot of hunters. I don't have a lot of investigators, even though their titles are called investigators. They spend all their time looking for SQL queries and scraps of Excel data, and they're trying to glue it all together. And that's ultimately what we're really trying to do. And when you see the use cases over on the left, they actually get bigger. So is it anti-money laundering? Am I actually front running? I'm probably doing both. I want to make as much money as I can, perhaps from the money I have, or I want to combine things. And that's now where a lot of the firms that we work with are starting to realize how hard it is to do one of these, much less, the entire list here, and then, work with their AML department or cyber or the other kinds of teams. So again, the vision here is clear. And what we've now seen is that from a technology sidestep here is that Tableau and SQL databases are great. They got us to trying to do that. But as we start to do these very, very complex things, I want to see data in real time. We're talking about all the blotter trades during a day. It gets cumbersome. And so now when we start to use our BI tools, it's good to look 3 days in the rearview mirror, but it's terrible to try and clear those so that the firm can make more money or identify potentially fraud early. Now there's this sort of machine learning and what's called a machine learning graph or algorithmic connectivity. That's been the rage over the last 3 to 5 years. But what people have learned is it's the whole picture. I've got to take those connections. I need to look at a blotter, which could be millions of trades, and I need to introspect that in real time. And I need a human to understand simply, what is it? What am I trying to do here? Where is the fraud, right? And so now what we start to see is this sort of combination or bolt on with our customers are seeing this enormous uplift. So a lot of the firms are doing machine learning. We're getting a good uplift. And if you're looking at the fraud and even AML, 5 to 10% is a big number. But now using this combination of machine learning or a graph connected technology can get us an additional 20%. Now we start to see that human in the loop, and this visualization process can get us. And now we're looking at a very significant kind of a lift. So that's why these kinds of technologies, and again, our connected from Expero is a bolt on. You don't have to rip and replace. This is not what you're doing today is bad. It's simply supercharging or augmenting that. And here's a real world example. And what we have found then is empirically with this particular customer, they looked at the false positives. They looked at the accuracy, and what they found was by bolting on this technology, you can see with the data, and we'll see that here in a minute, but empirically showing that they found alerts that were more productive and that were real fraud, and then basically squelching the noise. At the same time, we need to make sure that we didn't expose ourselves, and our compliance officer is saying, but now you found 10 things, but you've opened another door and worse has happened. So what we're showing now is this ability empirically to bring that value to the business, and more importantly, bring that home. Now, how does this work? Well, if I'm a trader, Expero actually has a companion product, and please join one of our other webinars for our finance workbench, where you can trade. You can do those things in real time. You can do blotters. You can connect logical data before you make your trade and be more intelligent. But during that trade, what if they were connected? So as I made my trade, I was connecting through the back end and through basically a single pane of glass for an investigator. And there was a series of alerts that were simply saying, this may not be fraud yet, but maybe it's out of bounds on compliance for the firm. Maybe the risk is that what they're trading, or there is potential real fraud. So this sort of one pane of glass capability, but at the same time segmenting what traders are doing. And again, if you're using your trading desk today, certainly that's great. And so this fraud system can bolt on. But the point of this is, in order to increase the velocity, lower that false positive, and increase the accuracy, we've got to have those two elements tied together. Now, what we see now is that I'm the trade sanctions group. I have to work next to the credit card group, the cyber group, the risk group. What we are now starting to see is this data connection across business units. I still, in the trade sanction group, may be connected to everything that I'm looking for in my world. But if I had a code joined alert, meaning a syndicate of people who were doing anti-money laundering, and they had moved some of their proceeds over into this trade world where they're perhaps front running or doing other kinds of things, or out siphoning on crypto, as Tim had mentioned, now it gets a little more complex. And what you see across the bottom then is the ability to have these teams work separated by pods or business unit. And again, your firm may call it something different, but the point of this is we need to know that if there is a connection, we need to know separately. So on the need to know for each business unit, I only need to know when there is a connection, not when there's not a connection. And so with the connected product, we're now capable of separating and then being this sort of bigger vision on where the fraudsters are coming from, and more importantly, how are they changing? Now, as we get into that, we start to see here that sort of pictogram, and this is a architecture of kind of how the system works. But I'm linking data, whether it's all of the trade book or blotter for the day, and perhaps I'm also doing KYC screening on another side. I may also be looping in things like blacklists on FinCEN or Treasury or other kinds of data. I can also do simple kinds of things. Did I just ask for a larger margin call? Am I allowed to do that? And is there linkages in my network or my previous banking history or other kinds of firm history that play into what I'm trading? So all of those factors now are at our fingertips. And that's where we start to see this machine learning, the standard Boolean logic that maybe we're using today, and then this graph model. And now what we can see is that same slightly more deep version of that single pane of glass. If I'm a trader, I do everything I normally do, but on the surveillance side, I can now tie these pieces of data together, and I can start to see quickly what those answers are. Now, how do I do that, right? A lot of people today, cool words, lots of graph, machine learning, degrees, centrality, similarity. These are all really good, powerful words, but what they mean to either the practitioners of looking for the surveillance, or if you're a trader, this just shows me patterns. Are there things that I can juxtapose good patterns, like a person that's trading? Tim and I work in a firm and we're doing a great job together. I can see that pattern, but then I can see people that are trying to imitate us. And now what I can do with similarity and connected or centrality, we can see that the bad persons are connected. And now, as we'll see here in a minute, all of these little dots are called nodes or vertices. Those hops, which could be a trade or a person or an account, become farther away. The farther I try and hide that, most traditional systems today can't find that. Over on the right, we have machine learning algorithms that really try and stitch all that together. So a lot of good buzzwords, Scott. But let's see what that really means. So now what we start to see then is this recipe. I want to find a pattern. Perhaps Tim got money from an account and he's connecting perhaps to another account that could be actually part of a Russian oligarch scheme. Then what I can do is I can start to say, well, how far down does that rabbit hole go? Is it connected by these nodes or circles that are far away? Or over on step number 4, I have a community or a syndicate. Are we hiding things through joint accounts? Are we using shell companies to do those kinds of things? And then I can overlay time and space. And that is very important, because when we start to see these things, they might be roving bands. They might be in geographies. They might be global, right? And that's part of really what we're trying to find. Now that I find all that data, now I can actually, with that higher accuracy, say, there is something here, investigator, and take them from a hunter to an investigator. And that's really what we're trying to do. So with that, we'll move over to where we are here. So what I'm going to show you today is really at the Expero financial crimes stack, which is everything above. So I could be an investigator, I could be an alert manager, a case management person, or it could be the line of business manager, and everybody kind of touches this elephant in a very different way. Now, our technology folks, we love you guys, and we have some other webinars that we can talk about. But what we'd like to do then is let's see this in action, right? We have different modules. So if I'm an investigator, I might use the alert module and the explorer. I might use case management. And again, these are designed to bolt on to your current systems today. Be fast. In some of these cases, we're doing working prototypes in weeks, and that is a game changer for a lot of our customers. So again, you can pick and choose sort of which ones make that work. And again, a lot of this is self-configurable, so you can drag and drop. You can make your world, whether you're an investigator or a line of business manager. So with that, we'll pop over to a demonstration. So in our first demonstration, what I want to do here is I want to show specifically what I'm doing inside of this environment. Let me maximize my screen here to be able to do that. So when I have this here, I'm actually now in this sell side. And again, we have another demo, and Tim can show you perhaps in a different webinar or other kind of content. But what I'm doing now is I'm making my matches. I'm doing my daily job. But as I do this, now what I want to do is I want to switch over to a dashboard where perhaps a trade surveillance person is seeing this. Now, when I do this, I can see that I have a dashboard. And maybe in the first section of this, I'm seeing a set of parties. I'm seeing something that is perhaps risky here. And I can see that, well, I'm not sure if this is risky yet. I see that this party here got something from perhaps an area that's under a watch. It's not exactly a fraud yet, but it's getting there, right? So part of what I want to do now is I want to dig in on what that element is. And I can simply look at that and I can say, well, Fran has some risk associated with him. I can see that he's got other wire transactions in his loop, but I see here that sanctioned country is there. Maybe what I want to do now is I want to set an alert. And what I'd like to do now is set a deeper alert for what I want to do. I want to say, well, not just the country that he's in, but I now really what I want to do then is I actually want to dig in more on what that element is. So I want to dig in here. I want to say, where is it? I want to see specifically that there is a community. I'm using that higher order math that we talked about to say, is there a syndicate perhaps? And then what I want to do is look for a similarity, which is there a pattern that we have seen before? And from that now, I can tune that to say, well, if I found something on a blacklist or I found a similarity, I can tune that alert. And now what I can do is when I find that, what do I want to do? I want this to come out and I want it to pop back up on my dashboard for what I want to do. And again, this could be some firms have alert managers, et cetera, and then they can actually go validate this. But now what I want to do is let's see what happens with that stronger alert logic from the connected toolbox. And now what I see is a much deeper linkage. What indeed I see is that I see a total amount coming into my party account here, and I see it diverting. I see it going in two different places. I see a prepaid commission, which is obviously something that I'm looking for. And then what I see is it's actually getting repaid back out through crypto, and it's going back out to another party over here. And I've been in effect sort of crossed the line between prepaid commissions, which is obviously a trade surveillance, but it's also tripped over an anti-money laundering where I'm routing the money out in crypto. So again, our point here was not to spend sort of all day on that, but to talk a little bit about how these things all work together. So as I switch over to my other screen here, what we want to do now is sort of bring this home. Hopefully what everybody has seen today is that behind the scenes, there is math that we can bring together. And as Tim mentioned, we have this ability to sort of, take those big problems and glue them together. Connected financial crimes makes this really easy. We're trying to make this into a very simplified world where every user has their view, whether it's a simple dashboard if you're in surveillance, maybe it's some sort of an alert in a current system that you already have. And the most important thing then is we're bolting onto this technology for what you already have so that we can accelerate and leverage what most of our firms have spent lots and lots of time and a fair amount of money. So with that, why connected financial crimes? That accuracy, being able to increase that accuracy by 60% is enormous. That decrease in false positives means that your teams can spend more quality time finding the fraud, finding whether it's front running or padding or circle path detection, those kinds of things. And I'm using that current technology stack. The other big statement here is that as the government changes those things, this ability to build those alerts, make those configurations by mere mortals and humans on top of the machine learning really makes it compelling. And then obviously modularity and sort of what Xpro brings to the table. And with that, we're drawing to a close here. And what we see then is if you'd like to come see us, you can certainly reach out to us. We're in 2 of the major marketplaces, and we'd love to start with a discussion. So if you have any questions, certainly reach out to us. So with that, Laura, back to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Scott and Tim. Let's see, for everybody that might have joined a little late, just to give you a heads up, if you want to drop some questions in the Q&A box, we'll go ahead and start Q&A right now. But we did have a few that came through. Let me pull them up. Scott, there was one for you that said, what kind of data do I need to get started on a POC?
That's a great question. So typically a POC is we're trying to show that proof of value. You know, some of our customers may take a set of data that perhaps they know is known for fraud. In that previous example, we looked at 2 months of blotter trades. We also had a series of data where we were doing some KYC data that you may already have. So we don't need an enormous amount of data. Now, some of our customers want to go pre-production pilot. So a very simplistic set of data. And again, those types of POCs can be done very quickly in maybe 2 to 3 weeks. And obviously the more real or more pre-production pilot can take a little bit longer, but not much.
Great, thanks, Scott. Tim, there was one when you were speaking, are you seeing more people automating or staying with spreadsheets and ML notebooks?
I think we see the full gamut. I think there are some very sophisticated institutions who are building a lot of this stuff themselves, either with our help or, you know, with large teams of people. And then I think some of the mid-sized institutions, you know, typically who have a lot of legacy and siloed solutions, are just trying to kind of swim as fast as they can using much more linear solutions, be it Excel or building their own notebooks, looking for those patterns. But I think the challenge, and Scott talked about this, is that the patterns are not only in time series, but they're in connected data. So you've got to kind of model the way the market works. And, you know, criminals, you know, be they, you know, rogue traders, you know, working within a bank, are pretty sophisticated at hiding those things. And some of those tools are just not fit for purpose. And as I mentioned, you saw the SEC has built out this team of data scientists who are experts in trading and looking for these patterns. And they're not using Excel. They're using very sophisticated tools themselves. There was an interesting article I was reading the other day that, you know, they've got so good at detecting front running and insider trading that they can do it to a very small level. So they're finding, you know, individuals at companies who are not trading large amounts, but clearly were aware of, you know, non-public information, and they're going after those as well. So, you know, even if you're a smaller institution, you've got to take this stuff seriously because the regulator is becoming really sophisticated.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Tim and Scott. I'm not seeing any more questions right now, but just as a reminder, we did record today's session, and I'll send out an email with a copy of the recording. It'll also be hosted on our website. So if you would like to ask any questions or schedule any time to chat with either Scott or Tim, we'd be happy to set that up. Just reply to the email and we'll get that going for you. Otherwise, oh, there's one that popped through. Oh, thank you. And otherwise, yeah, that's the presentation for today, and we look forward to the next one. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.